Henry Kissinger's intervention. He says that it's time to negotiate in Ukraine. Russia has to withdraw. Kiev should forget Donbass and Crimea. In order not to weaken Russia, the neutrality of Ukraine makes no sense, the American diplomat claims. The position that the time has come to resolve the crisis in Ukraine through negotiations is formulated by the former U.S. Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, who argues that the Ukrainian war has entered a critical turning point that must be exploited so that the issue can be resolved through conversations. In his article in the magazine The Spectator, entitled How to Avoid a New World War, the American diplomat points out that now is the right opportunity to avoid an escalation of military operations that could lead to global catastrophe. According to Kissinger, Russian forces should withdraw their troops to the Russian-Ukrainian borderline that was in place before February 24 invasion, but Kiev should forget about Donbass and Crimea. At this point, and given the issues that will exist in the territorial area, Henry Kissinger argues that if the negotiations don't work, referendums could be held in the hotly disputed areas in the presence of the international community. In other words, re-elections. In any case, Kissinger emphasizes that Russia should not be weakened because it's one of the leading powers of the world, while pointing out that any internal problems in Russia will be a major problem for the whole world. Diplomacy lost opportunity. Kissinger refers to the winter lull that will come on the battlefield in Ukraine, comparing it to the situation August 1916, when the Europeans involved in World War I tried to negotiate with the U.S. so that it would mediate a peaceful settlement of conflict. The American diplomat argues that then U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, due to the upcoming presidential election, missed the moment when diplomacy could have intervened in time to stop the bloodshed and save millions of lives. Is the world today at a similar turning point in Ukraine, when winter creates a forced pause in the conduct of large-scale military operation on its soil? Kissinger wonders. Peace through negotiations. He said, I have repeatedly stated that I support military operations by Allied forces aimed at countering Russian aggression in Ukraine, but the time is right to build on the strategic changes that have already been made, integrating them into a new structure in order to achieve peace through negotiations, he said. Ukraine's neutrality makes no sense. As Kissinger mentions, for the first time in modern history, Ukraine has evolved into the most important state in Central Europe with its resistance to Russian forces. He says the international community, including China, continues to prevent Russia from a possible use of nuclear weapons. Kissinger said, who with this in mind considers negotiations on Ukraine's neutral status no longer meaningful, and for this reason he points out that the peace process should connect Ukraine with NATO in whatever form it takes. No to the weakening of Russia, he says. However, he argues that the outcome of the conflict should not be aimed at weakening the Russian Federation, which is one of the leading world powers. He says Russia has been a key contributor to global balance and power balance for more than 500 years. Its historic role should not be downplayed, Kissinger said, pointing out that the possibility of internal issues in Russia, which has global nuclear potential, should be a big problem for the whole world. So what does Kissinger suggest? As for what should be done next, Kissinger restates the proposal he made last May, that this to draw a ceasefire line along the Ukrainian border as it was February 24 before the Russian invasion. As he says, Russia should withdraw from the territories it seized during a special military operation in Ukraine, but not from the Donetsk People Republic, Lugansk People Republic, and Crimea. Negotiations for that fate could begin after a ceasefire is reached in the event that the borderline between Ukraine and Russia that existed before February 24 cannot be reached either through negotiations or military means. The recourse to the principle of self-determination could be considered, that is, a referendum. And he says, under the control of the international community, to hold referendums on the self-determination of the highly disputed territories that have changed hands many times over the centuries, Kissinger says. The target? He says the aim of the peace process would be twofold. On the one hand, to confirm the freedom of Ukraine, and on the other hand, to define a new international security structure, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. In that case, Russia will have to find its place in the new order, Kissinger points out, stressing that the path of diplomacy will be thorny and full of disappointments, and that it will require vision and courage. Efforts to achieve peace and order involve two elements that are sometimes seen as contradictory. It's the desire for security and the need for acts of reconciliation, Kissinger says. This is from Banking News. I've translated this from a Greek article. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.